The wind howled through the forest with such ferocity that Thomas Shepard could barely hear his own thoughts. But what he could hear were his dogs barking frantically at something buried in the snowdrift ahead, their determination so fierce that they ignored his commands to return to the cabin. He trudged through knee-deep snow toward them, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air, wondering what animal had died out here that had his hounds so agitated. Rex and Bella were good dogs, trained for hunting and protection on his isolated homestead at the edge of the northern frontier. But they had never acted like this before, digging and whining with an urgency that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. When Thomas reached the drift, he saw what looked like a hand protruding from the snow, but the color was wrong, too green to be human. And for a moment he considered walking away because nothing good came from involving himself with things beyond the natural order. But Rex looked up at him with those loyal brown eyes, and Bella whimpered in a way that spoke of something suffering. And Thomas had never been the kind of man who could turn his back on a creature in need, even if that creature might be dangerous. He dropped to his knees and began digging with his gloved hands, pushing aside the heavy snow until he uncovered a face that made him freeze in recognition and fear. An orc woman lay half buried in the drift, her green skin pale with cold, her small tusks barely visible through her parted lips, and her pointed ears pressed flat against her skull. She wore leather armor that had been torn in places, revealing wounds that had bled and then frozen, and her dark hair was matted with ice and blood. Thomas put his hand near her mouth and felt the faintest whisper of breath against his glove. She was alive, barely, and he knew he had only minutes to make a decision that would change everything. Orcs were enemies of humanity in this part of the world, raiders who came down from the mountains to steal livestock and supplies, and harboring one could get him branded a traitor or worse. But looking at her face, so still and vulnerable, he saw not a monster but a woman who would die if he left her here, and his conscience would not allow that, no matter what his head told him about the dangers. Thomas scooped her up in his arms, surprised by how solid she felt despite her lean frame, all muscle and bone with little softness. She did not stir as he carried her through the snow, Rex and Bella trotting alongside him with their tails wagging as if pleased with themselves for finding her. The cabin was a quarter-mile away, and by the time he kicked the door open, his arms were burning with effort and his lungs ached from the cold air. He laid her on the bearskin rug in front of the fireplace and immediately set about building up the fire, throwing log after log onto the flames until the heat became almost unbearable. Then he turned his attention to her, removing her frozen armor with shaking hands, trying not to think about the fact that he was undressing an orc woman in his home, something that would have been unthinkable just an hour ago. Beneath the armor, she wore a simple tunic and trousers, both soaked through, and he knew he needed to get her out of the wet clothes if she had any chance of surviving. Thomas had been a soldier once, before he retired to this homestead to escape the wars and the killing, and he had seen enough battlefield injuries to know what needed to be done. He stripped her down to her undergarments with clinical efficiency, trying to ignore the way her green skin seemed to glow in the firelight, and wrapped her in every blanket and fur he owned. Her wounds needed attention, but first he had to warm her core temperature, so he heated water and made her drink small sips, tilting her head and letting the liquid trickle past her lips. She did not wake that first night, and Thomas sat beside her, watching the rise and fall of her chest, wondering who she was and how she had ended up half dead in a snowdrift on his land. Her face was striking in a way he had not expected, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw, and her tusks were small and almost delicate, curving up from her lower lip. He found himself studying her features, noting the scar above her left eyebrow and the way her dark lashes rested against her cheeks. By morning, her breathing had steadied, and her skin had regained some of its vibrant green color. Thomas cleaned and bandaged her wounds, which included a deep gash on her left side and various cuts and bruises across her arms and legs. The gash worried him because it looked like it had come from a blade, and he wondered if she had been in a fight, perhaps with other orcs or with human soldiers. Either way, she was in no condition to answer questions, and he focused on keeping her warm and hydrated. The days blurred together as Thomas tended to his unexpected patient, leaving her side only to care for his animals and gather firewood. The dogs had taken to lying beside her, as if standing guard, and more than once he found Rex with his head resting on her blanketed shoulder. On the third day, her eyes fluttered open, and Thomas found himself staring into irises the color of amber, flecked with gold and filled with confusion. She tried to sit up, but he pressed a hand to her shoulder, keeping her down. "Easy," he said softly. "You are hurt badly. You need to rest." Her eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the rough wooden walls, the fireplace, the dogs, and finally settling back on Thomas. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse and accented but perfectly understandable. "My homestead, about 10 miles south of the Frost Ridge Mountains," Thomas replied, sitting back on his heels. "My dogs found you buried in a snowdrift. You were nearly frozen to death." She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her processing this information, trying to decide if he was telling the truth. "You are human," she said finally, as if this was the most confusing part of the situation. "I am," Thomas confirmed, "and you are an orc. Which makes this an unusual situation for both of us." A flicker of something crossed her face, fear or pain or perhaps both. "Why did you help me? Humans do not help orcs. They kill us." The bluntness of her statement hit him harder than he expected, and he found himself without a good answer. "I could not leave you to die," he said after a moment. "It would not have been right." She closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she might have passed out again, but then she spoke. "My name is Kara. I am from the Iron Tusk clan, or I was, before they cast me out." Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "They cast you out. Why?" Kara opened her eyes again, and he saw a deep sadness in them. "Because I refused to raid a human village. Because I said we should try to make peace instead of war. Because I am a fool who believed things could be different." The weight of her words settled over the cabin like a heavy blanket, and Thomas understood that he was not the only one who had walked away from violence, not the only one who had paid a price for choosing a different path. "I am Thomas," he said quietly. "Thomas Shepard, and you are safe here for as long as you need to heal." She studied his face as if searching for deception, and he let her look, keeping his expression open and honest. Finally, she nodded, just a small dip of her head, and closed her eyes again. "Thank you, Thomas Shepard," she whispered, and then she slept over the following week. Kara slowly regained her strength. Thomas helped her sit up, then stand, then take short walks around the cabin. She moved with a warrior's grace despite her injuries, and he could see the frustration in her eyes at her own weakness. He cooked simple meals of venison stew and bread, and she ate with good appetite, her body clearly desperate for nourishment. They spoke little at first, both uncertain of how to navigate this strange situation. Thomas told her about his life as a soldier, how he had grown tired of the killing and the politics, and how he had claimed this land at the edge of civilization to live in peace. Kara listened, and in return, she told him about growing up in the Iron Tusk clan, learning to fight and hunt, and slowly realizing that the endless cycle of raiding and revenge was destroying her people. "The elders say humans are the enemy," she said one evening as they sat by the fire, Thomas whittling a piece of wood while she mended her armor with supplies he had provided. "They say we must raid or starve, that there is no other way. But I have seen the waste, the good warriors dead for a few sheep or a bag of grain. I have seen orc children go hungry while the chieftain hoards what we take. It made no sense to me." Thomas looked up from his whittling. "So you spoke against it?" "I did," Kara said, her hand stilling on the leather. "And they called me weak, a traitor to my blood. My own brother challenged me to combat, and when I refused to fight him, the chieftain declared me clanless and drove me out into the snow." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the pain beneath the words. "I am sorry," Thomas said, and he meant it. Family should not turn on family like that. Kara looked at him, and for the first time he saw a small smile curve her lips. "You are a strange human, Thomas Shepard. Most would celebrate the weakening of an orc clan. Most humans have not sat across a fire from an orc and heard her story," Thomas replied. "Most humans only see the raids and the violence, not the people behind them." The smile faded from her face, replaced by something more complicated. "And now that you have heard my story, what do you see?" Thomas set down his whittling and met her amber eyes directly. "I see a woman with courage enough to stand up for what she believes in, even when it cost her everything. I see someone who chose principle over safety. That is worth respecting, no matter what color your skin is." Kara looked away quickly, but not before he saw the way her eyes had gone bright with unshed tears. She cleared her throat and returned to mending her armor, but the silence that settled between them felt different now, warmer and more comfortable. As the weeks passed and winter deepened, they fell into a routine that felt almost domestic. Thomas taught Kara how to care for his animals, and she proved to be a natural with the goats and chickens, her strong hands gentle despite their size. She helped him repair the barn roof and split firewood, her orc strength making tasks that would have taken him days go by in hours. In return, he shared his supplies freely, never asking for repayment or expecting anything beyond her company. They talked more as the days grew longer in each other's presence, and Thomas found himself looking forward to evenings by the fire when Kara would tell him stories of orc traditions and legends. She had a gift for storytelling, her voice rising and falling with dramatic flair, and more than once he found himself laughing at some tale of orcish foolishness or cleverness. She seemed surprised by his laughter at first, as if she had not expected a human to find humor in orc culture. But then she began to smile more, and even laugh herself, a deep, rich sound that warmed him from the inside. Thomas caught himself watching her sometimes, noticing the way the firelight played across her green skin, making it shimmer like emeralds. He noticed the strength in her arms as she worked, and the intelligence in her eyes when she listened to him speak. He noticed that her tusks did not make her look monstrous at all, but rather gave her face a unique beauty that was entirely her own. These thoughts troubled him because they crossed lines he had never imagined crossing, and he tried to push them away, reminding himself that she was his guest, his responsibility, and that she would leave when spring came. But Kara showed no signs of wanting to leave, and as her wounds healed completely, she made herself more and more useful around the homestead. She reinforced the chicken coop against predators using techniques from her clan. She helped him smoke meat for preservation, and she even started a small herb garden in the cabin using seeds she said she had carried in her pack. The homestead flourished under their combined efforts in ways it never had when Thomas worked alone. One evening in late winter, as they prepared dinner together in the small cabin kitchen, Kara spoke quietly. "Thomas, I need to ask you something." He looked up from the vegetables he was chopping. "Ask. Why do you let me stay? I have been here for almost 2 months now. I am healed. You have no obligation to keep feeding me, sheltering me, yet you say nothing about me leaving." Thomas set down his knife carefully, considering his words. "Do you want to leave?" "I asked you first," Kara said, and there was something vulnerable in her tone that made his chest tighten. "You are welcome here for as long as you want to stay," Thomas said honestly. "I know I should probably want you gone, for my own safety if nothing else. If the wrong people found out I was harboring an orc, there would be consequences. But the truth is, I do not want you to leave. This place feels more like a home with you in it than it ever did when I was alone." Kara turned to face him fully, and he could see she was struggling with something. "I do not want to leave either," she admitted. "But I do not understand why. I should hate you. You are human, and humans cast my people out, pushed us into the mountains, forced us to raid just to survive. But when I look at you, I do not see an enemy. I see the man who saved my life, who treated my wounds, who showed me kindness I have never known from my own kind." They stood there in the small kitchen, the space between them feeling charged with something Thomas could not name. He took a step forward and then another, until they were close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her amber eyes. "Kara," he said softly, "I need to tell you something, and I understand if it makes you uncomfortable or if you want to leave after I say it." She lifted her chin, that warrior's courage showing through. "Tell me." "I think I am falling in love with you," Thomas said, the words coming out raw and honest. "I know it is impossible. I know there are 1,000 reasons why it cannot work. But I cannot stop thinking about you, cannot stop wanting to make you smile, cannot stop imagining a future where you stay here not just as my guest but as something more." Kara's eyes widened, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then she reached up and touched his face with her calloused hand, her green fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Among my people there is a saying," she said quietly. "The heart knows no tribe. I thought it was just words, something poets said, but now I understand. I have feelings for you too, Thomas, feelings that frighten me because they are so strong, so unexpected." Thomas covered her hand with his own, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. "What do we do?" "I do not know," Kara admitted, "but I know I do not want to hide from this. I have spent my whole life being told what I should think and feel and want. For once, I want to choose for myself." He pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her and feeling the solid strength of her body against his. She was taller than him by a few inches, broader in the shoulders, but when she leaned into his embrace, she fit perfectly. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, and Thomas felt something in his chest expand and settle, as if a piece of himself he had not known was missing had finally clicked into place. That night, they sat closer by the fire than they ever had before, their shoulders touching, their hands intertwined. They talked about what a future together might look like, acknowledging all the obstacles they would face. Thomas's neighbors were few and far between, but they would eventually notice Kara. Traveling to town would become dangerous for both of them, and there was always the risk that her clan might come looking for her, or that human soldiers might pass through on patrol. "We will face it together," Kara said firmly. "I have been alone before, cast out and left to die. I will not go through that again without fighting for what I want, and I want this, Thomas, I want you." Her words filled him with a fierce protectiveness, a determination to keep her safe no matter what came. "Then we make it work," he said. "We build a life here together, and we deal with problems as they come." They sealed the promise with a kiss, tender and exploratory, learning the shape and taste of each other. Her tusks pressed gently against his face, strange and foreign and perfect. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Thomas saw his own wonder reflected in Kara's eyes. The rest of the winter passed in a haze of happiness and hard work. They prepared the homestead for spring, making plans for expanding the garden and perhaps adding more livestock. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's moods and habits, building the foundation of something that felt permanent and real. At night, they shared the bed that had once been only Thomas's, finding warmth and comfort in each other's arms, taking their time to explore this new intimacy with reverence and care. Kara taught Thomas some of the orc language, laughing at his clumsy pronunciation, and he taught her to read and write in the human script, which she picked up with impressive speed. They created their own private world within the walls of the cabin and the borders of the homestead, a place where the outside world's prejudices and hatreds could not reach them. But the outside world has a way of intruding no matter how carefully you build your walls. Spring came early that year, the snow melting in great rushing torrents that turned the ground to mud and the streams to raging rivers. Thomas and Kara were working on reinforcing the fence around the goat pasture when Rex and Bella started barking at something in the tree line. Thomas looked up to see 3 figures emerging from the forest, and his blood ran cold when he recognized the armor of human frontier scouts. "Get inside," he said urgently to Kara, but she shook her head. "I will not hide from who I am," she said quietly, though he could see the tension in her shoulders. The scouts approached cautiously, their hands on their weapons. Thomas stepped forward, putting himself between them and Kara, and called out in what he hoped was a friendly tone. "Good morning. What brings you to my land?" The lead scout, a weathered man with a graying beard, stopped a few yards away. His eyes moved from Thomas to Kara and back again, and his expression hardened. "Thomas Shepard. We are doing a sweep of the frontier homesteads, warning people that there has been increased orc activity in the region. We heard you lived alone out here, but it seems we were misinformed." Thomas felt Kara tense behind him, but he kept his voice steady. "This is Kara. She is my partner. She lives here with me." The other 2 scouts moved their hands closer to their sword hilts, but the leader held up a hand to stop them. "Your partner," he repeated slowly. "You are cohabitating with an orc." "I am," Thomas said firmly. "And before you say anything else, you should know that Kara is clanless, cast out by her people for refusing to raid human settlements. She wants peace as much as any of us." The leader's expression remained skeptical. "That is quite a story, Shepard. But we have orders regarding orcs found on human land." Kara stepped forward, moving to stand beside Thomas despite his attempt to keep her behind him. "I am not hiding," she said clearly. "I am Kara of no clan. I was exiled by the Iron Tusk for opposing their raids. Thomas Shepard saved my life when I would have frozen to death, and I have remained here by choice. I have harmed no one and have no intention of harming anyone. I only want to live in peace." The lead scout studied her for a long moment, his hand still resting on his sword hilt. "You speak well for an orc," he said finally. "But words are cheap. How do we know you are telling the truth? How do we know you are not a spy or a scout for a larger force? Because if I were, would I be standing here talking to you?" Kara replied. "Would I have spent the last 3 months helping to repair this homestead and tend its animals? Would I be here at all if I had somewhere else to go?" Thomas saw one of the younger scouts whisper something to his companion, and he did not like the look in their eyes. "Gentlemen," he said, drawing their attention back to him. "I served in the 15th Infantry for 6 years. I fought at Blackmore Ridge and the crossing of 3 rivers. I bled for this kingdom, and I claimed this land as my right when I left service. I am asking you, as a fellow veteran and a citizen, to let this matter be. Kara poses no threat to anyone. The leader seemed to struggle with himself, and Thomas could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Finally, he sighed and removed his hand from his weapon. "I served at Blackmore Ridge too, Shepherd. I remember you, now that I think about it. You pulled a lot of good men out of that hellfire." He looked at Kara again, his expression still wary but less hostile. "I am going to do something I will probably regret. I am going to forget I saw anything here today. But you need to understand, if there is any trouble, any raids or incidents that can be traced back to this homestead, I will come back with a full company of soldiers. Do you understand me?" Thomas nodded gratefully. "You have my word." "There will be no trouble." The scout turned to his companions. "Come on, we have a lot of ground to cover before nightfall." As they turned to leave, he looked back over his shoulder. "Be careful, Shepherd. The world is not kind to those who cross certain lines, and you have crossed a big one." They watched the scouts disappear back into the tree line, and only when they were completely out of sight did Thomas allow himself to breathe again. Kara put her hand on his shoulder, and he covered it with his own. "That was dangerous," she said quietly. "You could have told them I forced you to give me shelter, that I threatened you. They might have believed that and left you alone." Thomas turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I would never do that. I will not lie about who you are to me or what we have built here. If people cannot accept us, that is their problem, not ours." Kara's eyes shimmered with emotion, and she pulled him into a fierce embrace. "You are either the bravest man I have ever met or the most foolish." "Probably both," Thomas admitted, and despite the tension of the encounter, they both found themselves laughing, the sound bright and defiant in the spring air. But the visit from the scouts had shaken them both, a reminder that their sanctuary was not as isolated as they had hoped. Over the following weeks, Thomas found himself watching the tree line more often, and Kara kept her weapons close at hand, even when working in the garden. They talked about what they would do if more soldiers came, if the kingdom decided that an orc living peacefully on a human homestead was too dangerous to tolerate. "We could go further north," Kara suggested one evening. "Beyond the frontier, into the wild lands where neither humans nor orcs hold territory." Thomas considered it. "That would be a hard life, with no trade, no supplies beyond what we could carry or make ourselves." "But we would be free," Kara said. "We would be together without fear." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Let us hope it does not come to that, but if it does, I will follow you anywhere." The next challenge came not from humans but from Kara's own kind. It was a warm afternoon in late spring when the sound of orcish war horns echoed through the valley, and Thomas felt his stomach drop. Kara's head snapped up from where she was weeding the garden, her eyes wide with recognition and fear. "My clan," she said, the words barely a whisper. "They have come." Thomas grabbed his bow and quiver from inside the cabin, checking that his sword was properly belted at his side. "Stay behind me," he said, but Kara shook her head. "They have come for me, Thomas. This is my fight." "Then it is our fight," he corrected, moving to stand beside her as 6 orc warriors emerged from the forest. They were larger than Kara, their green skin darker and their tusks more prominent. They wore heavy furs and leather armor decorated with bones and feathers, and they carried weapons that had seen much use. At their head was an orc who could only be a chieftain or war leader, his face scarred and his eyes hard as stone. The leader stopped a dozen paces away and spoke in the orcish language, his voice booming across the homestead. Kara replied in the same language, her tone firm and unyielding. Thomas could not understand the words, but he could read the body language well enough. This was a confrontation that could turn violent at any moment. Finally, Kara switched to the common tongue, and Thomas realized it was for his benefit. Chieftain Grok says I have brought shame upon the Iron Tusk clan. He says I have broken sacred laws by living with a human, and that I must return to face judgment or be hunted as an enemy. The chieftain, Grok, sneered at Thomas. And this weak human is who you have chosen over your own blood. This is pathetic, Kara. I expected better from one who carried the blood of warriors. Thomas Shepard is worth more than 100 warriors who only know how to take and destroy, Kara shot back. He showed me kindness when my own brother would have killed me. He gave me shelter when my clan cast me into the snow to die. And he has treated me with more honor than I ever received from any of you. One of the other warriors, younger and bearing a striking resemblance to Kara, stepped forward. "Sister, please," he said, and Thomas recognized the pain in his voice. "Come home. I was wrong to challenge you. Father was wrong to exile you. The clan needs voices like yours now more than ever." Kara's expression softened for just a moment. "Darg," she said gently, "brother, you know I cannot come back. Even if Father would forgive me, which he will not, I have found something here that I never had in the clan. I have found peace. I have found love. I have found a future that does not involve endless raiding and dying for scraps." Grok spat on the ground. "Love with a human is an abomination. The ancestors would curse you for this betrayal." "Then let them curse me," Kara said, and Thomas felt a surge of pride at the strength in her voice. "I am done living by the old ways, done pretending that we have no choice but violence. Thomas and I are building something new here, something that proves humans and orcs can coexist peacefully. If you cannot see the value in that, then you are a bigger fool than I thought." The tension ratcheted up another notch, and Thomas saw hands moving toward weapons. He raised his bow, not drawing but making his readiness clear. "I do not want to fight you," he said clearly, "but I will defend my home and the woman I love. If you force this, people will die, possibly including me, but I promise you will not leave here unbloodied." Grok laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "One human thinks he can stand against 6 orc warriors. You have courage, I will give you that. Foolish courage, but courage nonetheless." "He does not stand alone," Kara said, moving to stand shoulder to shoulder with Thomas. "And we have the advantage of defending a prepared position. Look around you, chieftain. The cabin has a clear field of fire in all directions. The fence posts are sharpened and reinforced. We have supplies, weapons, and 2 very loyal dogs who will raise the alarm if you try to come at night. And most importantly, we are fighting for our home, our future. You are fighting for pride and old traditions. Who do you think will fight harder?" Thomas saw the calculation in Grok's eyes, the weighing of costs against benefits. The chieftain was a warrior, but he was not stupid. A fight here would cost him warriors he could not afford to lose, and for what? To drag back one exiled clan member who would never truly submit. Finally, Grok nodded slowly. "You have made your choice, Kara, but know this. You are no longer of the Iron Tusk. If we meet again, we meet as enemies. Your brother may plead for your life, but he cannot protect you if our paths cross in battle." "I understand," Kara said quietly. "Goodbye, brother. I hope you find your own path one day." Darg looked as if he wanted to say more, but Grok turned and strode back toward the forest, and the other warriors followed. Darg lingered for a moment, meeting his sister's eyes, and Thomas saw him mouth something that might have been "I am sorry" before he too disappeared into the trees. When they were gone, Kara sagged against Thomas, all the strength seeming to drain out of her at once. He held her up, guiding her to sit on the porch steps, and she buried her face in her hands. "I knew it would happen eventually," she said, her voice muffled. "I knew they would come. But seeing Darg, seeing my brother's face, it hurt more than I expected." Thomas sat beside her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. He seemed like he genuinely regretted what happened. "He does," Kara said, lifting her head. Darg is a good orc, but he is trapped by clan law and father's will. He cannot leave the way I did, not without losing everything. And he has a mate now, children. He has responsibilities. Do you regret standing up to them? Thomas asked quietly. Kara turned to look at him, her amber eyes fierce despite the tears on her cheeks. Not for a single moment. I meant what I said to Grok. I have found something here with you that I never had in the clan. I have found a partner who respects me, who listens to me, who does not see me as less because I question the old ways. I have found love, Thomas, real love, and I would face down 100 war parties before I would give that up. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, pouring all his love and commitment into the gesture. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said suddenly, the words escaping before he could think them through. Kara pulled back slightly, her eyes wide. "What? Marry me," Thomas repeated, more confidently this time. "I know it is not legal in any kingdom or clan. I know there is no priest or elder who would perform the ceremony. But I do not care about any of that. I want you to be my wife, Kara. I want to stand before whatever gods or spirits you believe in and pledge my life to yours. I want to build a family with you, grow old with you, face whatever the world throws at us together. So marry me, please." Kara stared at him for a long moment, and Thomas felt his heart hammering in his chest as he waited for her answer. Then a slow smile spread across her face, transforming her from fierce warrior to radiant woman in an instant. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Thomas Shepard, I will marry you." They sealed the promise with another kiss, and then Kara laughed, the sound bright and joyous. "We are going to have to figure out our own ceremony, you know, combine human and orc traditions somehow." "I know," Thomas said, grinning. "That sounds perfect." They spent the next few days planning their wedding, deciding to hold it at midsummer when the days were longest, and the land was at its most beautiful. Thomas carved 2 rings from oak wood, inlaying them with precious stones he had saved from his military days, while Kara prepared traditional orc blessings and gathered herbs for a ceremonial fire. They invited no guests, because there was no one they could safely invite, but Rex and Bella would serve as witnesses, and that felt right for a ceremony that was about just the 2 of them and the commitment they were making. As midsummer approached, they prepared the homestead for what they jokingly called the wedding of the century that no one else will ever know happened. They built a small altar in the clearing near the cabin, decorating it with wildflowers and herbs, and Kara taught Thomas the orc words he would need to speak during the ceremony. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, the sun rising over the mountains in a blaze of gold and pink. Thomas dressed in his finest clothes, the military dress uniform he had kept carefully preserved, while Kara wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Thomas had traded for at a distant market, dyed green to match her skin. She looked stunning, her dark hair braided with flowers, her amber eyes bright with happiness. They stood together before the altar they had built, Rex and Bella sitting at attention nearby, and Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. Kara took his hands in hers, her grip strong and sure, and began to speak in the orcish language, her voice carrying the weight of ancient tradition. Then she switched to the common tongue so he could understand. "By the strength of stone and the resilience of the mountain, I pledge myself to you, Thomas Shepard. I will stand beside you in battle and in peace, in times of plenty and times of hunger. I will be your shield when you are weak and your comfort when you are weary. I will love you with the fierceness of my people and the tenderness you have taught me to feel. This I swear before the spirits of my ancestors, whether they approve or curse me for this choice." Thomas felt tears prick at his eyes as he squeezed her hands and spoke his own vows, mixing human and orcish traditions as best he could. "By the faith I hold and the honor I claim, I pledge myself to you, Kara of no clan. I will be your partner in all things, your advocate when the world is against you, and your haven when you need safety. I will love you without condition, without reservation, and without end. This I swear before whatever gods may listen, whether they bless us or forsake us for crossing the lines they drew." They exchanged the wooden rings, sliding them onto each other's fingers, and Kara lit the ceremonial fire using the herbs she had gathered. The smoke rose straight up into the clear sky, and for a moment, Thomas could almost believe that some divine presence was bearing witness to their union. "I declare us married," Kara said solemnly, and then she grinned. "Is there anything else human ceremonies require?" "Just this," Thomas said, and he pulled her into a kiss that felt like a promise and a celebration and a beginning all at once. They spent the rest of the day in celebration, just the two of them, sharing a feast they had prepared together and dancing to music only they could hear. That night, they made love under the stars with a new sense of permanence and commitment, and Thomas felt that every choice he had made, every path he had taken, had led him to this moment, to this woman, to this unexpected and perfect happiness. The summer passed in golden contentment. Thomas and Kara worked the land together, their homestead flourishing under their combined efforts. The garden produced more vegetables than they could eat, so they preserved what they could and traded the rest at a distant market where the trader knew Thomas and asked no questions about his unusual companion. The goats had kids, the chickens multiplied, and they even acquired a cow from a traveling merchant, paying with smoked meat and preserved goods. They developed a comfortable rhythm, dividing tasks according to their strengths and preferences. Kara loved working with the animals and proved to have a gift for it, while Thomas enjoyed carpentry and began building an addition to the cabin that would give them more space. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset, Kara leaning against Thomas's shoulder, both of them content with the simple peace they had created. But beneath the peaceful surface, both knew they were living on borrowed time. The frontier was changing, with more settlers arriving each month and the kingdom extending its reach further into what had once been wild lands. Sooner or later, someone would take an interest in the isolated homestead where a man lived with an orc woman, and when that happened, their refuge might not remain safe. The crisis came in early autumn, just as the leaves were beginning to turn. Thomas had gone to the distant market to trade, a journey that took 3 days there and back. He had wanted Kara to come with him, but she had insisted on staying to tend the homestead, and he had reluctantly agreed. It was a decision he would regret. He was 2 miles from home when he saw the smoke rising above the trees, dark and thick, and his heart seized with terror. Thomas urged his horse into a gallop, crashing through the underbrush with no care for the branches that whipped at his face and arms. When he broke through into the clearing where his homestead stood, he saw his worst nightmare playing out before him. The cabin was on fire, flames licking up the walls and devouring the roof. The barn had been knocked down, and the animals were scattered or gone. And in the middle of it all, Kara was fighting for her life against 5 human men dressed in the armor of kingdom soldiers. She was holding her own despite being outnumbered, her sword flashing in the firelight as she parried and struck with the skill of a trained warrior. But she was tiring, and Thomas could see blood on her arm and side. The soldiers were toying with her, circling like wolves, laughing as they called her vile names and spoke of what they would do to her before they killed her. Thomas dismounted in a single fluid motion and drew his own sword, the blade singing as it left its sheath. "Get away from my wife," he roared, his voice carrying across the clearing with all the authority of his military training. The soldiers turned, surprise registering on their faces, and Thomas used their moment of distraction to his advantage. He charged forward, years of combat experience guiding his movements, and his blade found the throat of the nearest soldier before the man could even raise his guard. The soldier went down in a spray of blood, and suddenly the fight was 4 against 2 instead of 5 against 1. Thomas moved to stand back to back with Kara, and he felt her solid presence behind him, grounding him. "Are you hurt badly?" he asked, parrying a strike from another soldier. "I have had worse," Kara replied, and he heard the grim humor in her voice. "But I am glad you came back when you did. I was running out of clever tactics." They fought together with a coordination born of months of working side by side, anticipating each other's movements and covering each other's weaknesses. Thomas had been a good soldier in his day, and that skill had not left him, while Kara fought with the savage grace of orc warriors trained from childhood. The soldiers, clearly not expecting such fierce resistance, began to fall back, but they were not retreating. Their leader, a captain by his insignia, called out orders, and the soldiers formed up for a coordinated assault. Thomas knew they could not withstand that kind of attack, not when they were already wounded and exhausted. He was preparing to sell his life as dearly as possible when a new sound split the air. Orcish war horns, but different from the ones Grok's warriors had blown. These were higher pitched, more complex, and they came from multiple directions at once. The soldiers' heads snapped around in confusion and fear, and then figures began emerging from the forest. But these were not the iron tusk warriors Thomas had encountered before. These orcs wore different symbols and colors, and at their head was Darg, Kara's brother, his face set in determined lines. With him were a dozen orc warriors, but their weapons were sheathed, and they positioned themselves between the soldiers and Thomas and Kara without attacking. Darg spoke in a booming voice that carried authority. "These lands are under the protection of the Grey Wolf clan. You are trespassing on territory we have claimed, and you are attacking people under our guardianship. Leave now, or face the consequences." The captain looked around, clearly calculating his odds, and found them wanting. 5 soldiers against more than a dozen orc warriors was a losing proposition, even if the orcs' claim to the land was dubious. "This is kingdom territory," the captain blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. "The kingdom is 20 miles south," Darg replied calmly. "This is the frontier, the wild lands, and we claim it by right of strength. Take your wounded and go before we decide that you have forfeited your lives by your actions here." For a long, tense moment, Thomas thought the captain might order his men to attack anyway, but then the officer's shoulders sagged, and he nodded curtly. The soldiers gathered their dead and wounded and retreated toward the south, casting dark looks over their shoulders but not daring to challenge the orc warriors. When they were gone, Darg approached slowly, his hands held out peacefully. "Sister," he said quietly, "I am sorry we did not arrive sooner. We heard about the soldiers planning to raid this homestead from a scout, and we came as quickly as we could." Kara lowered her sword, staring at her brother with confusion and hope warring in her eyes. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would you help us?" "You belong to the Iron Tusk. You should want to see me punished, not protected." Darg shook his head, and Thomas saw pain and regret in the orc's face. "Not anymore. After you left, I could not stop thinking about what you said, about how the old ways were destroying us. I watched our warriors die in pointless raids while our children went hungry, and I realized you were right. So I challenged Father for leadership of the clan, and when he refused to change his ways, I left. Others came with me, good orcs who wanted a different future. We formed a new clan, the Grey Wolf, and we are trying to find a better way. Kara's eyes filled with tears and she dropped her sword to embrace her brother. Darg, she whispered, you gave up everything. I learned from the best, Darg said, returning the embrace fiercely. My sister, who had the courage to stand alone against the entire clan. You showed me that change was possible, even if it cost everything. Thomas watched the reunion with his own eyes stinging, and he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see another orc warrior, this one female with scars crisscrossing her face, looking at him with something like respect. You fought well for a human, she said bluntly. And you protected my chieftain's sister with your life. That speaks of honor. She is my wife, Thomas replied simply. I would die for her. The orc woman's eyes widened slightly and then she grinned, showing her tusks. Then you are clan kin, whether you know it or not. The Grey Wolf clan honors those who stand by their bonds, regardless of what species they were born. Darg and Kara broke apart and the chieftain turned to address Thomas directly. Thomas Shepherd, my sister speaks highly of you, and I have seen your courage with my own eyes. On behalf of the Grey Wolf clan, I offer you our protection and friendship. Your homestead is under our guardianship, and any who threaten you threaten us. We ask nothing in return except that you consider trading with us when you can, and that you continue to prove that humans and orcs can coexist peacefully. Thomas felt the weight of the offer, understanding that it was more than just words. This was a declaration that could change everything, that could start building real bridges between the two species. I accept with gratitude, he said formally, and I offer the same in return. Any of the Grey Wolf clan who needs aid or shelter will find it here. They sealed the agreement with a warrior's clasp, and Thomas felt the strength in Darg's grip, the sincerity behind the gesture. Then the orcs set about helping to save what they could from the fire. The cabin was a loss, the flames having consumed it completely, but they managed to salvage some tools and supplies from the barn, and several of the animals were found hiding in the forest, including Rex and Bella, who emerged to greet Thomas with frantic joy. As night fell, the orcs set up a camp in the clearing and they shared food and stories around the fire. Thomas learned that the Grey Wolf clan was still small, barely 24 warriors and their families, but they were committed to finding a new way forward. They had established a village in a hidden valley to the north, and they were trying to learn farming and animal husbandry to supplement their hunting. We could use someone with your knowledge, Darg said to Thomas. Someone who knows how to work the land, how to build lasting structures. If you and Kara wanted to join us, you would be welcomed. Thomas looked at Kara, who met his eyes with a question in her own. They had a silent conversation, the kind that only couples who truly know each other can have, and then both nodded. We would be honored, Kara said. But we want to rebuild here too. This is our home, the place where we found each other and built our life. We do not want to abandon it. Darg considered this, then smiled. Then we will help you rebuild, and this homestead can serve as a meeting place between our clan and any humans willing to trade peacefully. A bridge between our peoples, just as you and Thomas are a bridge. It was agreed, and over the following weeks, the Grey Wolf clan threw themselves into helping rebuild the homestead. They erected a new cabin, larger and sturdier than the first, using both human and orc building techniques. They repaired the barn and reinforced all the structures against future attacks. And they helped round up the scattered animals and even added some of their own livestock as gifts to the newlywed couple. Thomas and Kara worked alongside the orcs, and Thomas found himself forming genuine friendships with several of them. He learned their names and their stories, discovered their humor and their hopes, and realized that the propaganda he had been fed during his military service had been built on lies and fear. Orcs were not monsters or savages. They were people, with the same desires for safety and family and happiness that humans had. By the time the clan returned to their village, the homestead looked better than it ever had. The new cabin was spacious and well built, the barn was sturdy, and the fields had been expanded and prepared for spring planting. Darg and his warriors departed with promises to return in the spring to check on them and to begin establishing trade routes, and Kara cried as she said goodbye to her brother. But these were happy tears, tears of reunion rather than loss. Thomas and Kara stood together on the porch of their new cabin, watching the orcs disappear into the forest, and she leaned her head on his shoulder with a contented sigh. "We did it," she said quietly. "We survived." "We did more than survive," Thomas corrected. "We built something beautiful. A home, a marriage, a bridge between two peoples who were supposed to be enemies. That is something to be proud of." "I am proud," Kara said, turning to face him. "And I am grateful for the day your dogs found me in that snowdrift, for every choice you made to save me and keep me and love me. You gave me a life I never dreamed was possible, Thomas Shepard." "You gave me the same," Thomas replied, cupping her face in his hands. "You gave me purpose, partnership, and a love stronger than anything I have ever known. I would walk through that snowdrift 1,000 times if it meant finding you again." They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Thomas knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The world might never fully accept a human man and an orc woman building a life together, but they had proven it was possible. They had created their own small corner of peace in a world too often defined by violence and hatred. As winter approached again, they prepared the homestead with the confidence of people who had survived the worst and emerged stronger. They stocked the larder, reinforced the buildings, and gathered firewood. They also set up a trading post near the road, a small structure where anyone, human or orc, could leave goods for exchange, a place where the two species could interact without fear or violence. The trading post saw slow but steady use. A few brave humans left grain or tools, and orcs from the Grey Wolf clan left furs and smoked meat. Thomas and Kara acted as intermediaries, ensuring fair trades and slowly building trust between the groups. It was small, fragile progress, but it was progress nonetheless. One snowy evening, as they sat by the fire in their rebuilt cabin, Kara placed her hand on her stomach with a small smile. "Thomas," she said softly, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from the leather he was working, seeing something in her expression that made his heart skip. "What is it?" "I am with child," Kara said simply, and the world seemed to stop. Thomas stared at her for a long moment, processing the words, and then a grin split his face so wide it almost hurt. He moved across the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around before remembering her condition and setting her down gently. "A child," he breathed. "We are going to have a child." "We are," Kara confirmed, laughing at his excitement. "A half-human, half-orc child. I do not know what that will mean, what our baby will look like or face growing up, but I know they will be loved, Thomas. So loved." Thomas kissed her deeply, his hands cradling her face, and when they pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. "They will be perfect," he said fiercely. "And they will grow up knowing that love is stronger than prejudice, that family is what you build, not what you are born into. They will have parents who crossed every boundary to be together, and a whole clan of orcs who will welcome them. That is more than most children can hope for." That night, they lay in bed talking about names and wondering whether the child would have tusks or pointed ears, or some combination of both. They talked about how they would teach their child to be proud of both halves of their heritage, to walk tall in both the human and orc worlds. And they talked about the future they were building, not just for themselves but for their child, and perhaps for many others who might follow their example. Spring came again, bringing with it new life and new hope. Kara's pregnancy progressed healthily, her strong constitution serving her well, and Thomas hovered over her with protective concern that she alternately appreciated and found amusing. Darg and the Grey Wolf clan returned as promised, bringing gifts for the expectant parents and offering their support. The trading post had grown in popularity over the winter, and now several human families were cautiously making contact with the orcs, drawn by the quality of the furs and the fair dealing. It was still uncomfortable for most, still viewed with suspicion by many, but it was a start, a crack in the wall of hatred that had separated the species for generations. One warm afternoon in late spring, Kara went into labor. Thomas sent Rex running to the Grey Wolf village to summon Darg and the clan's midwife, while he stayed with Kara, holding her hand and offering what comfort he could. The midwife arrived with impressive speed, an elderly orc woman named Grima who had delivered hundreds of babies in her long life, and she took over the process with calm authority. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Thomas feared he might lose Kara or the baby or both. But his wife was strong, stronger than anyone he had ever known, and she fought through the pain with warrior's determination. When the baby finally emerged, wailing loudly, Thomas felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it was almost painful. The child was a boy, perfect and beautiful, with skin that was a lighter green than Kara's, closer to olive in tone. He had Thomas's eyes, a bright blue that stood out startlingly against his green skin, and small tusks were just visible in his gums. His ears were slightly pointed, not as much as a full orc's but distinctly not human either. He was, in every way, a perfect blend of both his parents. "Our son," Kara whispered, cradling the baby against her chest, and Thomas leaned in to embrace them both, his family. "What should we name him?" Thomas asked, his voice thick with emotion. Kara looked down at the baby, then up at her husband, and smiled. "Tyler," she said. "Tyler Shepherd, a good strong name for a boy who will bridge two worlds." Thomas nodded, his throat too tight to speak, and kissed both his wife and his son, sealing this new chapter of their lives with love and commitment. Tyler grew quickly, thriving under the attention of two devoted parents and an extended family of orc warriors who treated him like a precious treasure. He was a happy baby, laughing easily and showing signs of both human cleverness and orcish strength. By the time he was learning to walk, he was already sturdier and faster than a human child of the same age, but he had his father's curiosity and his mother's determination. The homestead prospered as the years passed, becoming a true crossroads between human and orc communities. More families, both human and orc, began settling in the area, drawn by the promise of peace and cooperation. The trading post expanded into a small market, and Thomas found himself acting as a mediator and translator between the species, helping to smooth over misunderstandings and build genuine friendships. Kara became a leader in her own right, respected by both humans and orcs for her wisdom and her willingness to stand up for what was right. She trained young orcs in the ways of peaceful coexistence, while also teaching them to defend themselves, creating a new generation that understood both strength and compassion. Darg's Grey Wolf clan grew into a powerful force for change, proving that orcs could thrive without constant raiding. Other clans began to break away from the old ways, and while there was still resistance and violence from traditionalists on both sides, the momentum was shifting toward peace. Years later, Thomas stood on the porch of the homestead, watching Tyler play with a group of children, both human and orc, and he felt a deep satisfaction. The boy was 8 now, tall and strong, and he moved between the human and orc children with easy confidence, accepted by both groups as one of their own. He was the living proof that the divide between the species could be bridged, that love and understanding could overcome generations of hatred. Kara came out to join him, her hand finding his as it always did, and they stood together watching their son and thinking about the journey that had brought them here. From that desperate day when the dogs had refused to leave a snowdrift alone, through all the challenges and threats and moments of doubt, they had built something lasting and true. "You ever regret it?" Thomas asked quietly. "Everything you gave up to be with me?" Kara turned to look at him, her amber eyes still as bright and fierce as the day he had first seen them open in his cabin. "Never," she said firmly. "You gave me more than I gave up, Thomas Shepard. You gave me freedom, love, a family, and a purpose. You gave me a reason to believe that the world could be better. How could I regret any of that?" Thomas pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling the solid strength of her body against his. "I love you," he said simply, because after all these years those were still the most important words. "I love you too," Kara replied, and then she smiled. "Though I think we may need to expand the cabin again, I have news." Thomas pulled back to look at her, seeing the mischief and joy in her expression. "You do not mean—" "I do," Kara confirmed. "Tyler is going to be a big brother." Thomas laughed, loud and long and joyful, and swept his wife into his arms, spinning her around just as he had the first time. Their son looked over from his play and waved, and Thomas waved back, his heart so full he thought it might burst. This was the life they had built from impossible beginnings, a life rich with love and purpose and hope for the future. It had not been easy, and there would be challenges ahead as their family grew and the world continued to change around them. But they would face it together, as they always had, two people from different worlds who had found each other against all odds and refused to let anything tear them apart. As the sun set over the frontier, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Thomas held his wife close and watched their son play, and he knew with absolute certainty that every choice he had made, every risk he had taken, had been worth it. The dogs had led him to a snowdrift that day, and beneath it, he had found not just an orc woman still breathing, but his future, his love, and his reason for being. And that, Thomas thought as Kara leaned her head on his shoulder and Tyler's laughter rang out across the homestead, was the greatest gift anyone could ask for. A family built on love, a home built on trust, and a future bright with possibility. They had proven that even the deepest divides could be crossed, that even the most unlikely love stories could have happy endings, and that sometimes the most important discoveries were made when you refused to turn away from what others feared. Thomas squeezed Kara's hand, feeling the wooden ring he had carved for her so long ago, and she squeezed back, the gesture full of understanding and affection. They did not need words to communicate their feelings anymore, did not need grand declarations or elaborate promises. They had built their love in actions, in daily kindness and shared struggles, in the life they had created together against all odds. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge overhead, they called Tyler inside for dinner, and the three of them sat around the table in their warm cabin, sharing food and stories and laughter. Later, after Tyler had been tucked into bed with a kiss from both parents, Thomas and Kara sat by the fire, planning for the new baby and dreaming about the future. You think our children will have easier lives than we did? Kara asked, her hand resting on her stomach. Do you think the world will accept them? Thomas considered the question carefully. I think they will face challenges we cannot imagine, he said honestly. But they will also have advantages we never had. They will grow up knowing both cultures, accepted by both. They will have parents who fought for the right to love each other, and they will have a whole community of people, human and orc, who believe in what we have built here. That is a strong foundation, Kara. Whatever comes, our children will be ready for it. Kara nodded, leaning her head on his shoulder. You always know the right thing to say. Not always, Thomas admitted with a laugh, but I have had good practice. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant sound of wind in the trees. Outside, Rex and Bella were making their rounds, protecting the homestead as they always had. And Thomas sent a silent thank you to the two dogs who had refused to leave a Snowdrift alone all those years ago. Without their persistence, without their instinct that something was worth investigating, he would never have found Kara, never have built this life, never have experienced the joy and love that filled every corner of his existence now. What are you thinking about? Kara asked, noticing his far-off expression. About how lucky I am, Thomas replied. About how a single moment can change everything. About how glad I am that I listened to my dogs that day. Kara smiled and kissed him softly. I am glad you listened too. And I am glad you are stubborn enough to fall in love with an orc, foolish enough to marry her, and brave enough to build a life with her despite what everyone said was impossible. Someone had to prove them wrong, Thomas said with a grin. Might as well be us. They made love that night with the tenderness and passion of people who knew each other completely, who had built trust and intimacy over years of shared life. Afterwards, wrapped in each other's arms, they talked quietly about baby names and whether they should add another room to the cabin or build a separate house nearby for when Tyler was older and wanted his own space. The months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Tyler was excited about becoming a big brother, though he had many questions about whether the baby would look more like him or more like a human or more like an orc. Kara patiently explained that they would not know until the baby arrived, and that it did not matter because they would love the baby regardless of how it looked. The Grey Wolf clan continued to grow and prosper, and Darg visited regularly with his own growing family. His mate had given him 3 children, and they played with Tyler whenever the families got together, creating bonds that would last a lifetime. Other clans were beginning to reach out, interested in learning about the Grey Wolf's methods, and there was talk of forming a council of clans that could negotiate with human kingdoms as equals rather than as enemies. The trading post had evolved into a permanent market, with several buildings and a regular schedule of traders from both species. Thomas had hired a few assistants to help manage it, including a young human man who had married an orc woman from the Grey Wolf clan, and was eager to follow in Thomas and Kara's footsteps. Their story had become something of a legend in the region, proof that love could transcend even the most fundamental differences. When Kara went into labor with their second child, the process was shorter and easier than the first time. And soon Thomas was holding a daughter with skin slightly darker than Tyler's and hair as black as Kara's. She had her mother's amber eyes and small tusks, and her ears were pointed like an orc's. She was beautiful and perfect, and they named her Tessa Shepherd, a name that felt right the moment Thomas spoke it aloud. Tyler was enchanted with his baby sister, hovering near her crib and wanting to help with everything. He took his role as big brother seriously, and Kara and Thomas watched with pride as their son showed the same kindness and compassion they had tried to instill in him. He never questioned that his sister was different from him, or that his family was unusual. To Tyler, love and acceptance were just the natural way of things, and Thomas hoped that attitude would spread to others of his generation. As Tessa grew, she proved to have her mother's fierce spirit and her father's sharp mind. By the time she was 3, she could outrun most children twice her age and was already showing an interest in learning to read and write. The homestead rang with the sounds of children playing, and Thomas and Kara found themselves hosting gatherings that brought together humans and orcs in friendship and celebration. On one particularly memorable evening, as the homestead was filled with people from both species sharing food and music and stories, Thomas stood back and watched with wonder. This was what he and Kara had dreamed of, a world where humans and orcs could coexist peacefully, where children of both species could play together without fear or hatred. It was still fragile, still threatened by those who clung to the old ways, but it was real and it was growing. Kara came to stand beside him, Tessa balanced on her hip while Tyler played nearby with his friends. "We did this," she said quietly, gesturing to the crowd of happy people. "We started something that might actually change the world." "You started it," Thomas corrected gently. "By having the courage to question your clan, to stand up for what you believed was right. I just had the good fortune to find you in a snowdrift. And the good sense to dig me out instead of leaving me there," Kara added with a smile. "Do not sell yourself short, Thomas Shepard. You are a revolutionary, whether you intended to be or not." Thomas laughed and pulled his wife and daughter close, and Tyler abandoned his game to join the family embrace. Standing there with his arms around the people he loved most in the world, surrounded by the community they had helped build, Thomas felt a peace that went deeper than contentment, a sense that he was exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. The children grew tall and strong, navigating the complexities of their mixed heritage with increasing confidence. Tyler became a skilled mediator like his father, often called upon to help resolve disputes between human and orc communities. Tessa developed her mother's warrior skills and her father's diplomatic nature, and both children spoke fluently in both human and orcish languages. The homestead expanded into a small village, with several families, both human and orc and mixed, claiming land nearby. Thomas and Kara found themselves as unofficial leaders of this new community, guiding its development and ensuring that the principles of peace and cooperation remained central to its identity. The trading post became a proper marketplace, drawing merchants from distant kingdoms and clans, and prosperity flowed through the region. On the evening of their 20th anniversary, Thomas and Kara stood on the hill overlooking their homestead, now a thriving village, and reflected on everything that had happened since that fateful day when the dogs had refused to leave a snowdrift alone. "Do you remember how terrified I was when I first woke up in your cabin?" Kara asked, her hand in his as always. "How certain I was that you had saved me only to sell me to slavers or turn me over to soldiers." "I remember," Thomas replied. "And I remember how brave you were, even when you thought I might hurt you. You faced me with courage and dignity." "I was a fool," Kara said with a laugh. "I should have known from the start that you were different, that you were special. No ordinary man would have risked so much for an enemy." "You were never my enemy," Thomas said firmly. "From the moment I saw your face in that snowdrift, you were someone who needed help. And then you became my friend, and then my love, and then my wife and the mother of my children. You were always meant to be part of my life, Kara. I believe that." She turned to face him, her amber eyes soft with emotion. I believe it too. And I believe we have done something truly remarkable here, Thomas. We have built a place where our children can grow up without the hatred and prejudice that defined our own childhoods. We have proven that love is stronger than fear, that understanding is more powerful than tradition. That is a legacy to be proud of. Thomas kissed her, soft and sweet, and they stood together on the hill as the sun set over the village they had built, the life they had created from nothing but determination and love. Below them, they could see Tyler and Tessa helping to prepare for the anniversary celebration, and Thomas's heart swelled with pride and love for his children, for his wife, for the community that had grown around them. The celebration that night was magnificent, with humans and orcs dancing together, sharing food and drink and friendship. There were speeches honoring Thomas and Kara's contribution to peace between the species, and gifts presented from near and far. But the best gift, Thomas thought as he watched his family and friends celebrate together, was simply this: the knowledge that they had changed the world, one act of kindness, one moment of courage, one refusal to accept hatred as inevitable at a time. As the party continued late into the night, Thomas found himself thinking about the future. Tyler had begun courting a young woman, half-orc like himself, from a nearby village, and Thomas expected there might be a wedding soon. Tessa spoke of wanting to travel, to visit other regions and help spread the message of peace that her parents had pioneered. And there were rumors that the kingdom was considering officially recognizing mixed communities like theirs, granting them legal protections and autonomy. The world was changing, slowly but surely, and Thomas and Kara had been at the forefront of that change. It was not the life Thomas had imagined when he retired from the military to his isolated homestead, but it was infinitely better than anything he could have dreamed up on his own. Late that night, after the guests had departed and the children had gone to bed, Thomas and Kara sat on their porch under the stars, much as they had done countless times over the years. But now their hair had threads of silver, their faces bore the lines of time and experience, and their hands were weathered from decades of hard work. "You ever think about what would have happened if your dogs had not found me?" Kara asked quietly. "If you had taken a different path that day, or if the snow had covered me completely?" "Sometimes," Thomas admitted. "And it terrifies me to think how close I came to missing out on this life, on you, on everything we have built together. I would have lived alone on my homestead, probably never realizing how empty my existence was, and you would have frozen to death in that drift, your dreams of peace dying with you." "But that is not what happened," Kara said, squeezing his hand. "Your dogs found me, you saved me, we fell in love, and we changed the world. That is our story, Thomas Shepard, and it is a good one." "The best," Thomas agreed, pulling her close. "And it is not over yet. We still have years ahead of us, years to watch our children grow, to see this community flourish, to witness the peace we started spread further than we ever imagined." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from the raw materials of courage, love, and determination. The life they had created was not perfect. There were still prejudices to overcome and challenges to face, but it was real and it was theirs, and it was worth every sacrifice they had made. As Thomas drifted off to sleep that night, Kara's warmth beside him and the sounds of his village settling down for the night drifting through the window, his last thought was one of profound gratitude. Gratitude for stubborn dogs who would not leave a snowdrift alone, for the courage to dig beneath that snow and find a woman still breathing, and for every moment that had followed, every choice that had led him to this perfect, impossible, wonderful life. The story of Thomas Shepard and Kara, the human man and orc woman who defied every expectation and changed their world, would be told for generations to come. But for Thomas, living it was more than enough. He had found his purpose, his love, and his home, all because he had chosen kindness over fear, understanding over prejudice, and love over everything else. And in the end, that choice had made all the difference.